All right. So this is the framework. You have the science of teaching reading standards, and the science of teaching reading targeted for classroom teachers of early learners from birth through 8. From birth through 8 is the science of teaching reading, where we really like focus on building those foundational reading skills, and so that they can be proficient readers later. Okay, standards address the standards addressed the discipline that deals with the theory and the practice of teaching early reading. There's like actual scientific theory based on fact and neurology that shows us what parts of the brain are working, like what exactly needs to happen. So there's been so many advances, and we now know what needs to happen in order for reading to really run off. The standards inform proper teaching techniques, strategies, teacher actions, teacher judgments, and these are all things that'll be in the questions. They will ask you about proper teaching techniques in the science of teaching reading. They're going to ask you, what strategies could you use, what to help a student that's having difficulty decoding unfamiliar words. So you need to know those things. Teacher judgments, decisions by taking into consideration theories of learning, understanding of students and their needs. And so understanding the theories of learning that we already know with pedagogy, the new stuff that we know from the science of teaching reading, what we know about our students and their different needs and how that might affect learning just in general, and specifically how it might affect learning in reading. And backgrounds and the interests of individual students. Very important. This stuff here, the understanding of your students and their needs and the background and the interests of individual students, that's part of good pedagogy for any grade level, for any content area. You cannot teach your students if you don't know them. You cannot help them, grow if you're not measuring and assessing where they are, and then finding ways, utilizing their interests, their needs, their backgrounds in order to bridge between prior knowledge and that new knowledge. So the standards are aligned to the TEXES pre-kindergarten guidelines. Standards address early reading content knowledge in pre-K through 6th grade. The standards address early reading content in pre-kinder and 6th grade, with an emphasis on pre-kinder and 3rd grade. That's like where the real meat and potatoes is, if you will, for science of teaching reading. That's that bubble area where we can build neurological pathways and set up their brain through experience and practice and word games and decoding skills, so that it's mapped out and ready, and that their word bank, when they go off into the 8th grade, is filled. They have an enormous vocabulary, strong oral language proficiency, the ability to decode, and all of those things can happen. We know now, regardless of socioeconomic, regardless of anything else, if certain things take place, if you target language development and the teaching of reading in a specific way. And so that's all the STR is about. In fact, it's new. I watched it sort of come into fruition. It was just a nothing but suggestion based on the current scholarly thought about reading instruction. Like what is taught at universities about reading is different than what was taught 20 years ago. And so Texas, got on the ball, because we have terrible reading numbers, as far as states are concerned, ranking. Oral language proficiency all across the United States is down. And so all of these things can be addressed through science of the teaching reading. And I've already seen an improvement and more of an ease with access to reading with my 2 younger kids than my 3 older ones, because my 3 older ones are 19, 17, and 15. And they went through their pre-science of teaching reading, right? They're like the old way. And not that they had difficulty, but I just see how much more easy it is for the little ones to pick it up and to like start reading chapter books, because they're able to decode, and they're able to sort of, it's almost like a, in jujitsu they call it like muscle memory, if you will. Like a
Yes.
muscle memory. It is a muscle memory of reading. And so like they have it a little bit from one word that they played around with, and then they're able to apply it and know how to play to do. It's just really crazy and very cool to
No,
watch.
you hear you talk about how you've seen it with your little ones. I have one that's about to enter pre-K for this coming school year, and it never clicked to me that that like it's just this learning this stuff is gonna come really in handy for me as a parent, and
So
obviously also as an
good.
educator. So like now I have a
Absolutely.
even more of a drive to want to learn this stuff more. It just clicked when I hear
Absolutely.
you say that. That's neat.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and I'm a teacher always, like every day with all my kids, like every day is a lesson, like nothing that I plan out or, plan a
Yeah.
lesson plan, but anytime I see something, I'll point it out and make a lesson out of it and discuss it. And on the way to school, sometimes we're stuck in traffic, we'll play with like substitution and deletion games. I'll say like, okay, how do you spell sit? And like, and that's easy. And they'll get mad if I give them something easy because they're in first and second grade and they're like, that's babyish. I'm like, okay, we'll spell it if it's so baby. Sit, sit, sit. And they're like, SIT. And I'm like, okay, well, let's delete this. And now we're going to put a B there. Now, what does it say? Or, and they play with language like that, or they try to come up with words with alliteration or with like repeating type words. To that language play is important because it builds a meta linguistic, kind of like a muscle memory in the brain with language, and it unlocks in such a way.
Yeah.
And very cool. So with emphasis on kindergarten through grade 3, in order to meet the needs of all early learners. So everybody in these content areas, with these content areas, has to have STR. It's important that they know that, because you, even if you have, let's say, 6th graders, you could see deficiencies in their reading, right? In their fluency and or language proficiency, progress all over, and might have to go back and help in some of these areas, those basic areas. So knowledge of reading development components, the classroom teacher, as identified in all of that, you have to demonstrate understanding of kindergarten. And this is important. This is what people like never forget. And you're going to just have to go there and either print them out and or take notes. Hold on, I'm getting my little drawing thing. So you have to do all of these areas here, right? And in the TEKS, kindergarten through 6th grade, TEXES essential knowledge and skills, and also the pre-kindergarten guidelines. That's very important. The ones that are pertaining to reading, and apply the knowledge of our pedagogy, developmentally appropriate, research, evidence-based assessment, and instructional practices, always to promote students' language skills. And so the areas, and we're going to go and take a look at them at the TEKS right now, what they're speaking to, but this is the exam framework. They're telling you, and I try to tell everyone, because some people will spend so much money on 4 different manuals, and literally anyone can print a manual. Like I could print a manual if I had the time to sit down and write it, but they're not all good, and we can trust getting it from the horse's mouth, from the source, and that's our standards and the TEKS. That is where the exam comes from our standards and the TEKS, from nowhere else. There's no other source or textbook that they come from. Only our TEKS, which is the student knowledge, knowledge and skills that they have to accomplish at each grade level. So in kindergarten, there are particular things in each of these areas: in oral language development, in the print awareness and knowledge in phonemic and phonological awareness. There are particular things that we do at each grade level to help build those skills, those foundational reading skills. And it's all of this is based on years, decades of research and experts, like I said, scientists, neurologists, instructors, educators. So let's go to the TEKS. Very important for us to not ignore or forget about the TEKS, because they're so very important. And the thing is, some people, because it looks like a lot and it's written on the page, as you'll see in a little bit, kind of. I'm gonna go here and we're gonna just go to kindergarten and we'll look at the pre-kindergarten kind of. But like, look how uninviting this document is. It's very important that you go through it though. It's so very important. These are the things that you have to do with your students. They must master everything on this page during this grade level, right? And so depending on the grade level, and as we get higher, those skills become a little bit more challenging, right? The knowledge becomes a little bit more complex, but you see developing and sustaining foundational language skills. This is in kindergarten, one of the, and I would go through Carlos, and as you know, this is a reading / writing test. Use one of the strategies we use for reading a document like this. So if I were you, I would print this out and then I would go paragraph by paragraph and try to put it in my own words. Very short, like one sentence. What is this mostly about? What was this mostly about? In my own words. If I have to draw pictures, if I need like examples, I will put them there as well. But this is you engaging with the text and making it your own. It's not good enough to just have read it carefully through. I want for you to think about the language, the information in such a way that you're able to retrieve it on the day of the exam when they're talking about Miss Sauceda's kindergarten class and what she's noticing while the students are, blending syllables to form multiple whatever. You have to know what's appropriate at that level, what go in what order we do things at, right? Because these things are going to be listed in order. So let's take a look at some of the first ones. And I just wanted to, before again, reiterate for you to read these. They remain the same throughout. So we'll go to, for instance, first grade real quick, and you'll see it's going to be the same here. The 7 strands of essential knowledge are integrated and they're recursive in nature. So you don't teach them in isolation. It's not just like my lesson's going to be about oral language proficiency. No, I am doing oral language proficiency every day, every minute in my class while I'm talking to them, while I'm asking them questions, while I'm modeling and repeating our new vocabulary. All of those things are my practice in oral language proficiency, right? So we do them all together, but certainly we have to focus on particular things as well. You'll see oral language proficiency holds a pivotal role in school success. Verbal engagement must be maximized. And it's so true. And I never really thought about it. And as I say, I always mention my children, but I am also a scholar. I have 2 master's degrees. I wrote one thesis on how my students wrote on MySpace, how they were taking what they learned in class and sort of changing it and making it their own on MySpace. And so I always look at things from like a research perspective. And like, I sort of feel like my kids are this ongoing experiment. But they've all had very high oral language proficiency because we are always talking, all of us, and especially the younger ones, because they have older siblings. And so all of us are talking and we're all using like sort of the same level of language, and so their level of language has to be where ours is. And that ability to speak, that naturalness in nature, their access to more words and understanding of more words helps their ability to engage with content better, and their ability to ask for clarity. Like, neither one of my girls is embarrassed about saying, hold up, I'm a little bit confused about this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like, but that's the way that they have been trained. And we have to retrain our kids, because some kids don't talk at home. I mean, it's very sad, but literally I again with my kids, but when my oldest was in junior high, I remember him telling me, because he was like in the 8th grade, I think, when my youngest was born. And so he was telling me, and they would always freak out with the little ones when they would learn new things, or when they would say sentences that were pretty cool. And we're like, man, that was kind of crazy for a 2-year-old to say to us. But he said, Mom, some of my friends' parents, they don't speak to them. Like, they don't talk to each other. Like, they don't say, like, they say like, hi, how are you doing? What would you want to eat? And then it's just like separate places, and not a lot of speaking that goes on. But that happens a lot, and not always from a place of neglect. Some people have like jobs and they're not with their children, multiple jobs. I have a lot of kids who come from the working poor class, which means their parents are overworked and underpaid. So a lot of reasons for them to not have access to practicing language. So for us, one of the best ways we can help somebody acquire language is just to talk to them. Talk. Let's talk about it. And building that basic communication skills for them. And then and that mindful teaching of new vocabulary, always new vocabulary. And I actually visited last week a 2nd grade classroom, and the teacher she was doing an excellent job. It actually was a social studies lesson, but she was doing science of teaching reading and social studies. She was defining some of the words. She broke it apart into the morphemes, the word pieces, and forget what the word was. It might have been unapproachable.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, they broke it down, and they were able to together, the kids, so they were like, well, unfortunately, unpleasant, like they were coming up with examples of things that are uns. And from there, they were able to say, okay, so this is like not something that's like not good, or like, the opposite of what it should be. And so it was really nice to see the kids break down practicing, and it wasn't a reading lesson. She was doing social studies. And so it was very interesting. And I can see where that would help in so many ways for every elementary teacher, regardless if you're doing math, science, social studies, blah, blah, blah. You take the science of teaching reading so that you know also how to help them. It's all
Yeah.
hands on deck. Everybody is helping them acquire language. The
Is this
teacher cannot do it
something?
alone.
Is this something that like? What about teachers who won't need to be taking the science teaching reading? What about them? Are they going to be receiving like some mandatory training on these things, or is it only going to be new teachers from the testing who have
Oh
started?
no, everyone that was existing, they had to attend. And actually some districts, it's just crazy. Some districts required that new teachers that passed the STR had to go through that. It's like they're called reading academies, and
Okay.
they're long, and apparently in many districts unpaid. But yeah, they are getting instruction. There's no way that you know there's just no way. Everybody had to
Yeah.
yeah, so everyone had to have that, because it's very important. Like I said, all hands on deck. She was not doing a lesson in reading specifically, yet she was still utilizing science of teaching reading, for them to understand the text that they were reading. And so it was really great.
Yeah.
English language learners are expected to meet standards in a second language. However, the proficiency in English influences their ability to meet these standards. To demonstrate this knowledge throughout the stages of English language acquisition, comprehension of text requires additional scaffolds. You have to do more for your ELLs, because already learning to read is hard for the little ones, right? It's not, I mean, still to this day, we were just talking about yesterday. My daughter was writing her invitations for her birthday next Wednesday, and she's in first grade, and she spelled it like it sound. And actually,
Yeah.
we were like, my son was like, it's spelled Wednesday. She was like, huh? Like, there are
Oh.
some things that don't follow the rules and sort of like trick the kids up. But if you talk to them about them and you expose them, they become more proficient. So learning to read and learning English is difficult anyways. Having that be a second language, and you're having to learn to read at the same time while you're also learning the language itself, the spoken and, you know, written, all of the above forms. So it's difficult. You have to give them more scaffolds, give them more steps of support, adapted text, translations, whenever possible, native language support whenever possible, pairing them next to someone that is a native, their language, that can speak their language. In the Valley, it's easier because a lot of people speak Spanish, so it's easy to find someone who is also fluent in Spanish. And so what that does is, just really adds an extra added leg of support for the student. There is, however nice you are, a feeling of shame when you feel like you don't know something, even if your teacher's nice and they're whatever, there is a sense of pride in all students, and nobody likes to feel ignorant. Nobody likes to feel like they don't know what's going on or that they don't know what they're doing. And so I feel like a lot of behavior problems stem from that. But with our ELLs, no one likes to feel like they're ignorant, and they're by no means ignorant. They just don't know the English language. That makes you feel a type of way. Add that to being a child in a new place. And so making sure that we are providing many supports, spokes of support in the wheel of support. And this is really important. ELLs can and should be encouraged to use knowledge of their first language to enhance vocabulary development, to understand their vocabulary. So as they're writing their vocabulary word and drawing a picture, there's no problem with them writing what it is in their language down there for their notes. What would be the problem in that? For them to make that connection? Yeah. And like, but there used to be a time where they're like, no other language, all English. You cannot cut off a student from their resources. Their resources is prior knowledge. Their prior knowledge is founded in another language. To erase that completely, first of all, sends a very bad message to the student on how what they know and they come with is not important or valuable. And there's just so many other issues. So giving them every support, cognates, summaries, pictures, visuals, pictures, videos, pictures, lots of examples, glossaries, bilingual dictionaries, and vocabulary is necessary for all students in all content areas. If you're a science teacher and you're talking about like the different types of rocks, and you are, not only defining, you're having the students define it in their own words, and then showing them examples, having them draw examples, or and then utilizing that knowledge in a way in class so that they have to talk about it, like, so they have to repeat and talk about these terms that they've learned about. And so vocabulary needs to be in the context of the connected discourse. So it has to be like meaningful. Oh, sorry, I have a puppy trying to climb out. Okay, he went back into hiding. In context. So for instance, if I was a third grade teacher, and I'm doing my vocabulary, my weekly vocabulary that I choose every week. And I noticed my ELL students are having difficulty remembering, or that all of my students, and that would be because it's not in context. We remember things when they make sense and there's a point to it, not just a list of words that I've arbitrarily chosen to give you as vocabulary words for this week. So it can't be like willy-nilly chosen words like out of a hat. In context, I am defining things that we are going to use today in class, discuss them, you'll see them illustrated, and so that you can understand them and be amongst it. Okay. So let me see. Strategic use of the student's first language is important to ensure strategic use. Strategic means you are using it carefully, not just like, everything in your first language. You do have to be strategic about that because you're trying to build their capabilities in English. So there has to be active practice in the listening skills, in the speaking skills, in the reading skills, and in the writing skills. So to ensure linguistic, affective, cognitive, and academic development in English. So to ensure, we have to, affective is like their self-esteem. Like I said, you cannot tell a kid, no Spanish, only English, and make them feel shamed for their native tongue. I can't imagine what that would feel like. And I would imagine it would feel really terrible and mess with my self-esteem. And that's what affective development is, their ability to be confident, self-reliant, and their self-esteem. How intact is it? How good do they feel about their abilities? And if we are chastising them for doing something natural and something that's very important and that's a resource in their learning, then they're not going to do well. It can actually affect them cognitively. Okay, current research stresses the importance of effectively integrating second language acquisition with quality content area education in order to ensure ELLs require the social, which is the BICS, the basic interpersonal communication skills that'll allow me to say like, oh, my dog had puppies. Like that's just basic. When I'm talking about students being able to segment words into morphemes, that's academic specific language, right? It takes our ELLs a good 3 to 4 years, if everyone's working at it, to build their basic interpersonal communication skills strongly. And we need that to be sort of bolstered with everybody, all hands on deck, accommodating and instructing, so that we're always instructing, so that we're accommodating students linguistically, that we're giving them like more visuals for the vocabulary, teaching the vocabulary in context, giving them lots of maybe even summaries of things, or adapted text, shorter versions, more pictures, like I said. Instruction must be linguistically accommodated in accordance with the ELPS and the students' English language proficiency levels to ensure mastery of knowledge and skills in the required curriculum. And so those documents that they're talking about are here. Here is the ELPS instructional tool. I love this tool so much. Do you have access to this folder, to the PPR folder, Carlos?
I'd have, hold on, let me go check. I don't know if I've gotten that shared with me yet.
If not, I'll send it to you. You don't have to check.
Okay.
But
Right.
it is a really good read. And you said you're a reader, and this is really good. And it also has really great visuals. Visuals of what, and it explains to you what the state means by language instruction must be targeted. I mean, this must be focused, it must be targeted, it must be systematic. This is what it means. Pre-teach academic and social vocabulary. If you know that there's a word in today's reading that might be weird, it's because it's like from the Midwest or not, and we're in the Valley, pre-teach that word. Pre-teach that so that they have that added spot of support for comprehension. building background knowledge. So it goes into very deep detail, but in these nice little, sorry about that. Hold on a moment. Hi, Mr. Bookman. I'm actually on on a session. Can I call you back? Thank you so much. So here are the descriptors, and this describes where they are. Are they beginner, an intermediate, advanced, or advanced high? We don't have to provide so many supports for advanced and advanced high. That's why beginning and intermediate are like the ones that are highlighted there. That is not to say that we don't provide any support for advanced, but they just don't need it. Some of my best writers in high school were ELL students, advanced high ELL students that wrote like doctoral students. You know, they were just brilliant. They had access to more language. I figured it out long ago. They had 2 sets of vocabulary that they were working with. Now, once they figured out how language kind of works and cognates, man, they could say things really beautifully in the English language. So advanced and advanced high, you don't typically get so many questions about them, but you may, because you still can utilize them as means for help and support in your class, in your cooperative learning groups with advanced high students, with intermediate students, to help them gain some skills, some language skills. So you have the descriptor. What does it look like when the student is a beginner listener? They struggle to understand simple conversations and simple discussions. They can't understand a simple discussion like, my dog had puppies, or I need to go to the restroom. The language isn't there. And because the language isn't there, because of these descriptors, there are particular things that we have to do in order to help them just navigate school for a little bit. Visuals, slower speech, verbal cues, gestures, labels on things, constant checking for understanding. I have a book that I read and there's a video in the PPR, playlist. And I in one of the videos, I read the book in its entirety, but it's written by an ELL student who became a teacher. And it really shows a lot of insight, because this was when she was in school, probably was like in the 90s. And so she did it, a lot of things, like a lot of balls were dropped, if you will, you know what I mean? Like on the first day of school, nobody told her or helped her with lunch, so she didn't eat. Nobody thought she didn't have the language to ask anyone, where do I go, where do I sit, who do I get something from, and a lot of things, because she didn't have the language and nobody asked. So we are always checking for understanding and doing needs assessment, especially with our ELLs. Just like, are you okay? Did you need anything? The bathroom? Or, when they're a beginner, you are checking for, it might feel like charades, especially if it's not, I've had students that their first language is Mandarin, and I don't speak any Mandarin, but I have to learn about it. And so when you have those students, you're going to have to find ways in which to build on their knowledge.
Yeah.
Here are the intermediate ways to help with intermediate: visuals, slower speech, verbal cues, simplified language, gestures, pre-teaching to preview or or to build a topic. And that's really great when you do that preview, that build up to the topic. It's like a trailer to the show. Their brain's already kind of seen some of this stuff, and now I'm redoing it again. And it helps solidify things. And if that is repeated over and over again, the students can and will gain access to the language, especially if their classroom is a place that's safe and they have the ability to like practice their language and their speech without being made fun of for like mispronouncing things or like having an accent, because we need the students to feel comfortable practicing, you know what I mean? Practicing a new word. I still mispronounce things. I still mispronounce sometimes words, like, I don't know, I get tongue tied. So I tell my kids, there's nothing wrong with mispronouncing things, or when you're reading a word, like saying it wrong and going back and figuring it out. That's not a big deal at all. It happens to everyone. And so we need the kids to be comfortable, to practice, to make mistakes, to get into the language, especially our ELL students. So I'm going to make sure that I send you this, because I want to go back to our TEKS. And so what I was showing was the ELPs, and why we went there is because it refers to them. So you do need to look at them, because it's stated there in the beginning of the framework for the exam that the TEKS K-6, that's what the exam comes from in all of those areas. And then there's an additional section that we didn't look at just yet. So we're going to take a look at knowledge and skills. So we have developing and sustaining foundational skills. And these are foundational skills for everyone. If a student comes to me in the 9th grade from another country, they're going to be building foundational language skills again at age, 14 or 15. They're going to be doing listening skills, speaking skills, discussion, oral language, but from scratch, right? Because it's another language. That's not true with our native English speakers. So we're coming from a place where many of them, have some listening skills, but they're all varied all over the place, like just different skill level, different proficiencies, and you have to accommodate for all of their needs. So the student develops oral language through listening, speaking, and discussion. Kindergartners need to be listening, speaking, and discussing things. They are expected to do these things in your classroom. Listen actively, ask relevant questions to clarify, and answer questions using multiple word responses. They have to do that before they leave your classroom. They have to follow, restate, and give oral instructions that involved a short, related sequence of actions. They need to do steps, be able to follow steps, and restate them orally to explain what they did. First, I cut out the circles, and then I glued them on the Christmas tree, and then I put the star or whatever. But in the sequence of action, share information. So all of these things, looking at kindergarten, developing, sustaining foundational skills, listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking, beginning reading and writing. So this is how we're going to begin our instruction for reading and writing. The student must develop word structure knowledge through phonological awareness. And if you watch my videos, I go into detail about what exactly phonological awareness is. Print concepts, phonics, morphology to communicate in morphology. We'll look at some examples of things that I have. Decode and spell. The student is expected to do these things and in this order, because how can we do spelling words with initial and final concept blends, digraphs and trigraphs? How can you jump to there in this is 1st grade, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, 1st grade. How can you jump to there in 1st grade? You can't. You have to be, for sure, demonstrate phonological awareness. You're checking for many of these things, producing a series of rhyme words, recognizing, and like I said, rhyme words like sit, mit, kit, and that way they're able to spell those things. Once they know one, they're like, oh, I know it, I know sit, I know kit, I know mit,
Yeah.
She knows all of them now. Now she's like got all those words. And we teach them with different groups, and like I said, it creates a meta-linguistic map in their brain. So producing rhyming words, recognizing spoken alliteration or groups of words that begin with the same spoken onset or initial sound. So when they're talking about onset, they're referring to, and you might have seen it before, and you might have seen it on the test, onset rhyme. Onset is the initial sound, like let me see, study. The onset is st, and the rhyme is uddy. The onset is just before the vowel, before the first vowel. Everything after is the rhyme. So students with the first onset, they are or they can blend, they can you know, do like what I was saying where or I don't think I told you, but I did that different one, like doing the end, switching the end out, the rhyme instead of the onset. Distinguishing between long and short vowel sounds in one syllable words, one syllable. Recognizing the change in spoken words when a specified phoneme is added, changed, or removed. So we call this addition. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's the animal hospital. Can you hold just for 1 second?
Yeah.
Sorry. Hello, this is Stephanie.